Okay, today we've got a quick look at the Dark Ages. And when we study the Dark Ages, we automatically think that there's a sort of this negative stereotype to it, that there was a lot of terrible things going on. And while there may, Viking attacks and invasions and conquests certainly are happening. This is very, very much true. There's a lot of war going on, a lot of expansion in empires. But there's this other side of the Dark Ages where it may not be so dark. There is still a lot of learning going on. There's still a lot of scholarly advances going on, particularly when we talk about the Umayyad Empire and the caliphate that sort of expands out in areas like Cordoba, Spain. So there's both sides that need to be addressed here when we talk about the Dark Ages, both the good and the bad. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the Byzantine Empire and Justinian. We'll travel through Charlemagne's Holy Roman Empire. We will take a broad look at the Islamic Empire, the Umayyad dynasty. And then finally, we will wrap up with the Vikings and the great cultural diffusionists that they were. So, got a lot to talk about. Let's see how we do. Let's start with Justinian. Justinian was a dreamer. The kid loved to dream. He would just sort of stay out there and think about what life could be. The thing about Justinian was that he was not born that. His actual name was Flavius Petrus Sabatius, really long Latin name. And he was born a peasant. So he didn't have a lot of money. He was lucky because he had a role model to sort of show him the way. And his role model was, of course, his uncle Justin. And his uncle Justin went to this famous city called Constantinople, a crossroads of culture. And it was there that he became part of the palace guard. But he knew that he loved his nephew very much and wanted to take care of him. And so he went back for Flavius and brought him to the city of Constantinople. He got him a great education and all of the classics and really wanted to make sure that this young Flavius Petrus Sabatius would no longer be a peasant, that he could be something, that he could pursue his dreams. And so his uncle becomes a leader, and young Flavius decides that because he's so grateful that he learns about this, philosophy and art and math and science, he decides that he's going to take on a new name. And that new name is Justinian. And so that's the name that we recognize him by. But I always say, if you want to get a bonus question rate in Mr. Casey's class, you got to know his real name, Flavius Petrus Sabatius. Now, Justinian, whom is named after his uncle Justin, not to be too complicated, is going to help his uncle take the throne. You see, when the emperor of Constantinople passes away, it was tradition that the senators would go to the palace guard's leader, and they would talk to the palace guard leader, and they would bribe him and give him some gold to make sure that whoever the senators chose for emperor would sort of pass right on through. Well, the senators come to Uncle Justin, and they say, here's some gold, we want to pass along this guy, make him emperor, and Justinian looks at his uncle, and he says, take the money, take it. And so they do, and then Justinian says, we need to use this money for bribery. And what they decide to do is they take that money that one senator gives to Uncle Justin, and they spread it amongst the rest of the senators. And the idea is that if you bribe a majority of the senators, well, then Uncle Justin becomes emperor. And that favorite tool of bribery works very well. His uncle becomes emperor. And Justinian is by his side throughout. Now, Uncle Justin, of course, does not live forever. And when he passes away, Justinian is next in line to take the throne. And he eventually marries this really famous actress in history, whom you should probably know a little bit about, in Theodora. Theodora was an actress. Theodora was a poor person that sort of became a rags to riches story. So both are poor. They both become emperor and empress. And now the two work together to control the empire. Now, the great thing about their marriage was that Justinian was very, very well known among one of the political parties in Constantinople. He was very well known with the Blues. And the Blues are a political organization, also known as a deme. And so these blue demes, they like Justinian. Justinian likes them. And on the other side, you've got Theodora, whom comes from a family that's well known among the green demes. And so really what their marriage is is this sort of bringing together, this bridging together of the two warring families or the two warring gangs within Constantinople, the Blues and the Greens. Now, the Blues and Greens would often go to big chariot races at this massive dome called the Hippodrome. And it was at the Hippodrome where 100,000 people could gather together to watch races. Chariot races, not races for hippos. That's not what happened, okay? And so they're racing horses, not hippos, at the Hippodrome. And Justinian is out there, and they're sort of loving this. Justinian is having a great time, and the Hippodrome was a way for all the masses to come together and enjoy entertainment. More on that in just a little bit. As emperor, Justinian was famous for his famous law code. He named it after himself, Justinian's Code, of course. And Justinian's Code is unique in this way. It's not as simple as Hammurabi's Code, an eye for an eye, or as overtly discriminatory with the 12 tables, where you had a totally separate law code for patricians as you had for the plebeians. He sort of tries to echo to this concept of natural rights, something that a famous philosopher, John Locke, will take. The idea is that we are all born with certain natural rights, and that's what Justinian's Code sort of offers up to law codes. Justinian is able to take a bunch of laws and sort of make it into one text that people can attack and people can understand. He's got this textbook writer that makes a textbook so that lawyers and judges can look back and say, okay, these are the laws on the books. These are one set of laws that everyone can follow. To compound that, so he creates this law code, he also has to make money. And so how does he do that? He reforms the tax code. That's a really nice way of saying he hires a man by the name of John the Cappadocian, whom sounds like a mobster, right? And he hires John the Cappadocian to reform the tax system. John the Cappadocian goes to the rich people and he tortures them until they pay their taxes. And so he's getting a lot of tax money, maybe by means that we're not very comfortable with, but he's still making money hand over fist. And all the while, he's got this big dream. The dream is, I want to reunite Rome. He wants to take back Rome. So you got this wonderful city of Constantinople using bribery to gain the emperor's seat for his uncle Justin. You've got Justinian on the left and Theodora on the right. The Blues and the Greens. Of course, the Blues being represented by Justinian, the Greens by Theodora. This is a rendition of what the Hippodrome sort of looked like, this big giant place where 100,000 people could gather, just a huge structure. And they would watch races like that. And here I imagine that this is sort of like Justinian looking out upon his empire and really thinking about what he can do, what he can make, that he could dream up this huge empire, that he could actually reconquer Rome. And what he is going to do, quite interesting, is he's going to try to send out a famous general that you probably never heard of, Belisarius. And Belisarius' goal is to reconquer Rome. He wants to do it, and he's going to get very, very close. Okay, so we've got Constantinople. I always tell students that it is the crossroads of culture here. This is the capital city of the Byzantine Empire, the eastern half of former Roman Empire, right? And the Byzantine Empire, the two things that you got to know, that the Regents wants you to know, is that they preserve Greek and Roman culture. That is the big legacy of the Byzantine Empire. So if there's one thing you take away from this, it's that the Byzantines are able to preserve Greek and Roman culture. Please know that. That's 100% going to be on the test. Now, Constantine is the one to rebuild Byzantium. And so Byzantium is the old city. Constantinople is the new city. And of course, Constantinople is named after Constantine, whom was able to convert many of the Romans to Christianity after that famous battle, and he puts the crosses on his shield, all of that good stuff. So that's sort of the background. Constantinople is located between Europe and Asia. You should know geographically where that is. It's in the center, and therefore That's why it's such a crossroads. That's where you get all that cultural diffusion, because it's in the center. It's an excellent harbor. It's right around the Mediterranean Sea. So it's protected on 3 sides of water, which is good for defense as well, but also good for trade, right? It can ship goods very easily. It becomes the busiest marketplace. And of course, because there's so much trading, wherever you see trading, you're going to see a lot of cultural diffusion. You're going to see some Greek, some Roman, some Christian. You're going to eventually see a lot of Islamic traditions pour into the city. You've got the Hippodrome there. MetLife Stadium, I'm a big Giants fan, can hold 82,000. The Hippodrome could hold 100. So just speaks to really the modern marvel that it really was. It was just so far ahead of its time, the Hippodrome. Now, Justinian is also famous for building the Hagia Sophia. And I guess we really need to talk about the Hagia Sophia in just a little bit. First, Justinian, a couple of things. Guy's an autocrat. He is a dictator. That's really the way that you should understand Justinian. That while he is a dreamer and while he's trying to reconquer, he certainly does not want to share power with anybody. He tries to control the church to the best of his ability. He's going to play a big role in the schism that occurs between the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, and we'll talk about those differences much later. He's going to use all that tax money that he's getting from John the Cappadocian to keep a strong army, a large army, and a powerful one that is going to try to reconquer Rome. He builds the Hagia Sophia, and he's going to do this out of the ashes of what we would call the Nika revolts. And the Nika revolt really centers around this horrible time where the Demes were at war with each other always. They never really truly liked one another. And the Hagia Sophia is going to be built out of the ashes of that revolt. There is the Hagia Sophia. There's the inside. Now you're going to notice some Arabic script there. That is because it is no longer controlled by the Byzantines. They are no longer there, right? It is now named Istanbul. And a great song by Fallen Giants to talk about that is available on YouTube, most definitely. Now, that Nika revolt, something you should know, something you should be aware of. What is it? What happened? I'm summarizing here. The Nika revolt essentially is this. The Demes were executed, both blues and greens, and they were angry that this autocrat, this Justinian, would execute the Demes. And so what they did is they were in the Hippodrome, and they started to all chant one word at the same time. Nika. Basically means victory. Like, they're going to have victory over Justinian. That's scary. 100,000 people all chanting one thing at once. It's scary. Don't care who they are. And so Justinian flees. He's afraid. He leaves through a secret passage, gets out, and ultimately he wants to leave Constantinople. Like, he wants to run, hide. But his wife, Theodora, doesn't want to run and hide. She says that she is not going to run, and she is not going to die being anything less than an empress. And so she says, we're not taking the treasury, we're not going to do this, we're going to stand still, we are not running, we're not cowards, right? I want to be buried in the noblest shroud, meaning purple, that I want to die royalty. And so she gives this huge speech, and I think Justinian sort of feels bad about that, and he feels a little bit like a coward. And so he goes back to his old playbook. And if you recall, how does he get power? He uses bribery, right? And so he's going to do the same thing. He's going to bribe the leaders of the Demes, get the leaders to phase out and leave the Hippodrome. And once those leaders are out, it'll be easy pickings, right? There's no leadership. There's just a mob and a mass inside the Hippodrome. And so he does it. He sends one of his confidants over with some gold. He bribes the Demes. He comes back, and Justinian sends in his famous general Belisarius, and he crushes the Nika revolt. Over, done with. And out of the ashes of the Nika revolt, he will build the wonderful Hagia Sophia. And to get money for the Hagia Sophia, to fundraise it, yes, the tax system helps, but he needs to conquer. He needs to conquer land, take land, and as he's taking land, he's of course taking wealth along with it. And so if you look at this map, you'll see that the darker red is land that was gained by Justinian, land that he sort of is able to stretch out and take. Now, Justinian's not really taking that. Belisarius is, of course. And Belisarius gets right outside the city of Rome. I mean, he's right outside it. But ultimately, he's going to have to be recalled back. And I'll sort of talk about that at the end. Justinian's code pictured there. We've talked about it at length, so I really won't go into it too much. Theodora, we've sort of talked about her. She's cared for the poor. She championed women's rights. She really had this affinity for making sure that women were taken care of, that abused women were taken care of, that enslaved women were no longer enslaved. And she really worked to combat this and fight this and champion women's rights. She would advise her husband very closely. Evidence of that is, of course, the Nika Revolt. Some say she saved the empire with that. And my argument that I tell students is that when she died, Justinian wasn't the same. He didn't rule the same way. He didn't have the same effect that he did have when she was around. And so the glory of the Byzantine Empire, I believe, dies with her as well. Here's Belisarius, that greatest general that you never heard of. He is recalled out of retirement multiple times. He gets outside of Rome. He is recalled back as Justinian has an army waiting outside his gates of this Persian mass, and he has to come back and really fight against them. And this whole struggle that Justinian has to fight. He does reconquer Carthage, and he really gets really close to reconquering Rome, but ultimately has to pull back as this horde of soldiers is outside Constantinople. Now, once his dream fails, Justinian will spend the rest of his life trying to bridge the gap between the two churches. So on the left-hand side, you've got the Roman Catholic Church. And on the right, you've got the Byzantine Church. And what you should know about the Byzantine Church is that it becomes the Eastern Orthodox Church, the church that will become the Russian Church. Okay, it gets exported north. Now, the Roman Catholic Church stays around for a very long time. And the basics of it was that you have a pope at the top. Priests can't marry, Latin's the official language, your major holiday was Christmas. If you were a part of the Byzantine Church, though, the emperor was at the top. It was the patriarch of sorts. The priests could marry, Greek was the official language, and of course the major holiday was Easter. Now, this schism, this split, right, between the divisions of religion in Constantinople, it really defines the Byzantine struggle. The Roman Catholic Church wins out, but if you can imagine, if you're Justinian, you don't want the Roman Catholic Church to win because you do not want to share power with the Pope. And so he supports the Byzantine Church. He supports the Eastern Orthodox Church. He wants to be a total strong autocrat, right? And so he will support the Byzantine Church above the Roman Catholic Church. And the schism only widens. The split between these two churches only gets larger. So we've got our schism. A big reason between the split, religious images. These things called icons. Basically, could you see God in a church? Should you see the face of God in a church or Jesus or anything like that? I would argue that the bigger split is really between who runs the church. Is it the emperor or is it the pope? Big reason why there was a split. And that's 1054. Just to give you an idea of the actual split. And the Eastern Orthodox Church lives on. They are forever rivals. And ultimately, the Eastern Orthodox Church will go to Russia. Now, the Byzantine Empire does not live on forever. And I'm not here to talk about the fall too much, other than to say they're going to be hit by invaders. Cultural diffusion is a little bit of a curse in some ways. Yes, it's great for trade, but it's also great for conquest. The concept that you're in the crossroads of the world, you're going to meet some good people, but you also meet some bad ones too. And it's going to become a weak and divided empire over time. You don't see the same sort of leadership that you get with Justinian. You won't see that. Eventually the Crusades will totally smash this, and the Seljuk Turks are going to come in with gunpowder and really just destroy the city, take it over, rename it Istanbul. But I think that's like a whole separate lecture, and so I won't get into that too much. Lasting legacy. Remember, I need you to understand that they preserve Greek culture. They preserve Roman culture, okay? They keep accurate records. They have these beautiful mosaic tiles. So those of you that argue that it's the Dark Ages, hold on. They have art. They have literature. They are pursuing the intellectual things that we would consider as part of like a golden age, Now, I'm not here to argue that that's what it was, but I am arguing that it's not quite as dark as maybe we first believe. Roman architecture is preserved. You just look at the Hagia Sophia and you can see that dome structure that they are able to create. And the Orthodox Church and the Orthodox religion is going to have its own Cyrillic language that's exported up north. And so that is going to remain a part of Russian culture. Now, let's talk about Charlemagne. Charlemagne, if Justinian was an autocrat, Charlemagne was strong, but maybe not that same level of autocrat. He is going to actually share power with the Pope, and that this crowning right here on Christmas Day is a huge step in unity in Europe. It won't last, but it certainly was a step in the right direction. So I always ask students, how important is education, because Charlemagne believes that it is very, very important. Even central to understanding and ruling a group of people. So to do this, we got to talk about the fall of Rome. Like what happened. So we've already talked about the Byzantine Empire living on. But if you look at this map, great map, because it really shows the different Germanic groups, the Germanic tribes that is sort of swept down through. Not quite unified, and they all have different tracts of land that they are controlling. And we call these Germanic tribes ruled by barbarian kings, right? As sort of a slanted interpretation, because I'm sure they didn't think of themselves as barbarians at all. But for the sake of argument, you've got all these different kings that are ruling. The Romans are not allowed to hold power. So if you were a Roman person, you're not getting any power. It is the Germanic people that are going to sort of try to take over. And these Germanic people aren't going to, all stay Germanic, right? The kingdom of the Franks, they're going to become this French group of people, but more on that in a little bit. The Franks of Gaul are going to be led by a guy named Clovis. And Clovis has a very similar story to Constantine. Prays to Jesus, does the whole crosses on the shield thing, and ends up winning. And when he does that, he converts to Christianity, just like Constantine. And it's this change in history. You wonder why there's those Christian roots in French culture, and French being very Catholic. It starts here, right? It starts here with this Christian outpouring by Clovis. The Roman Catholic Church supports Clovis, makes an alliance, right? And so Clovis becomes very, very strong, and the Franks are improving their situation. On the other hand, so while that's sort of going on in the Gallic, former Gallic tribe kingdoms, and now you got this new French group, you should talk a little bit about the Germanic kingdoms and know something about them. So society was very patriarchal. Men dominate, and we just look back in history and we've seen this, right? We've seen it with ancient Athens. We've seen it with Han China, where there's a lot of patriarchy involved. Now this we haven't seen. So their laws aren't quite like Rome or like Justinian's code. Not really laws that you would really think of. Instead they have something called the War Guild. Money for a man. Essentially you hurt somebody or even kill somebody in Germanic society, you pay that family or that kin money. You pay them enough and it goes away. But you have to pay, right? You have to pay. Otherwise, you're going to get yourself in trouble. So the War Guild, you paying for a perceived wrong, for hurting somebody else. And while we may not think that is very moral to do, of course, it happened. The other part of this that students struggle to really get is the ordeal. And the ordeal basically worked by trying to figure out if the gods could save you from pain, they will. And if you're telling a lie, they definitely won't. And so what you would do is you'd hold a hot iron in your hands. And if you could get through the entire story without dropping the hot iron, and it wasn't hurting you, well then obviously you're telling the truth. Because God protects those who are innocent. God protects those who are truthful. And so you'd go through this ordeal, and if you could hold the hot iron long enough and get through your story and tell them the truth and everything, you were clean and you were good. But if you couldn't hold the hot iron, well, then you're obviously a liar, and you're going to get the penalty, whatever that penalty is for the crime. So I sort of, I don't know, find an analogy to students who come to school with, it's like 20 below and they've got their shorts on and they just think that they're, tough, and they tell me it's not cold outside and all that kind of stuff. It's the same thing. Guys have been trying to be tough guys for centuries. It never ends, right? Okay. Now, this is, in my opinion, a huge turning point in history for mankind. Not just for the West, not just for Rome, but for everybody. There was a invasion by the Saracens, Muslim armies, part of the Caliphate, right? Who are sweeping up through Spain, and they are trying to conquer the rest of Europe. That's what they're trying to do. We'd spread that Caliphate. And they get really close. They get to this famous battle called Tours in France. Modern-day France, of course. And they get up to Tours, but they are stopped. They are halted. And so what we would consider the Umayyad dynasty, right? That's the sort of the ruling family, the big empire, right? The Umayyads. They expand through Spain and they try to conquer the Franks. But it's Charles, the Hammer Martel, the leader of the Franks, who's able to defeat the Umayyads at the Battle of Tours, and they sort of able to send them back. And this is a turning point, because had Charles Martel lost, well, we might be speaking a different language, we might be dressing a different way, this might be a totally different history. But Charles the Hammer Martel, with his impressive hammer, right, something like that, is able to push them back, and ultimately, his grandson, Charlemagne, is the one that is going to unify a lot of Europe. So this is a big, monumental time in history where things change rapidly. I believe that it's a turning point, and I don't think it gets enough credit for that. So Charles the Hammer Martel pushes the Umayyads back, the famous Battle of Tours, and now you get Charlemagne. He is a warrior for sure, but very, very pious, very, very religious man. Christian. He believes that education is the key to survival. That is, that you need to get well-educated people if we're going to win this sort of war of cultures that's developing between the Muslim armies that had sort of pushed into Europe and the Christian armies that remained. Charlemagne's empire is sometimes referred to as the Carolingian Empire, but what we will really talk about is that it's the Holy Roman Empire, right? That's the empire that I really need you to know. And he takes this title, Holy Roman Emperor, okay? He does that. The Pope crowns him, and this is a monumental day where the Pope says, listen, you are the one true king. The Holy Roman Empire begins again with you. And he will be, in some historians' eyes, the father of Europe. And he is sort of the father of Europe because he uses education to keep the people going. He uses education to keep the light on in Europe, and he creates this unity factor within Europe that sort of keeps us together in some capacity. All right. We talked about the Umayyads pushing up through to Tours, and I'll review that for sure. But here's a look at the Caliphate, how big, how massive this empire is. It's huge. And to do it, they had good leadership. A guy by the name of Abu Bakr. And Abu Bakr, after Muhammad takes over, he's got the blood of Muhammad, and he is going to wage wars called jihad. He's able to defeat the Byzantine armies in Syria. He's able to conquer all of Persia. I mean, just a massive endeavor. He's able to do it. I mean, looking at that map, I mean, just ridiculous amount of conquest that he's able to do. But he was smart too. It wasn't just about conquering, right? That doesn't work. It only works for so long. You have to have some toleration. And so what he would do, much like the Persian armies used to do, is they would allow you to practice your religion. Sure, practice your thing, but we want a fee for that. We want you to pay up if you're going to practice some other religion that is not Muslim, that is not Islam, right? And so the Umayyad Empire spreads. You got this new caliphate that is able to expand into Spain. That little city of Cordoba is where a lot of the Muslim scholars will go, and they will really, really trend set and create some ideas that are going to be lasting among the modern world. Of course, just to review, the caliphate was halted at the Battle of Tours by Charles the Hammer Martel. So, achievements. Well, first, it's a pretty cool achievement. At the city of Cordoba, Spain, there was a man named Ibn Firnas, and he just, happened to create the world's first glider. Now, it wasn't very, very successful because it didn't have a way to steer and land and all that kind of stuff, but the guy tested his own glider, knowing that he couldn't, land effectively or steer effectively, which is, kind of crazy. And he hit the ground really hard, and he lived with back pain for the rest of his life. But the point is that they were challenging what humans could do. And most of the time, we give credit to the Renaissance in Italy with the flying machine and things like that, and that's not really quite accurate. I mean, we are having this during the Dark Ages. The Umayyad dynasty is pushing the limits of what humans can do, and I think that they should be recognized for that. Now, a lot of the Islamic places, towns, cities, and things would have these giant covered trading areas, covered markets called bazaars. And so these bazaars are a hotbed of cultural diffusion, right? This is where all these different cultures are coming together. They're trading. They got this really awesome economy booming, but there's a lot of cultural practices being shifted and moved across. And if you ever played Assassin's Creed, then you know what a bazaar looks like. Other achievements. For those of you that love math class, the Arabic numeral system was created and modified during this Umayyad dynasty reign, and you've got the Arabic symbols being used in Cordoba, much like you see over on the left. Other achievements would include the astrolabe, where this allowed people to know where they were going to sail based on the star position, based on the horizon, and it's just another tool that sailors were able to use to become more accurate where they were sailing. Really cool astrolabe there. Now, there's this big debate about who's the first to recognize that the earth is round and not flat. And so I make the argument that the Muslim scholars at Cordoba knew. They knew that it was round. They used calculations to decide that it was round, and they were ahead of the Europeans. And that's something that I guess we don't talk enough about, but they were. Scientifically, they were ahead of Europe. And yes, Europe is going to take these ideas, but for now, they recognize that it's not a flat place, like many Europeans thought. They're also, just like the Byzantines, really, really good with mosaic tile, as seen over there, and their mosques, their Muslim churches, are going to use mosaic tiles. Now, the fall, again, just like I did with the Byzantines, I don't want to make this all about rise and fall and spend too much time. I'll get off track. So the short version is the Umayyad Empire is going to become too big, much like Rome. It's just massive amount of land, right? Because of that, you need leadership and dynasties that are powerful and strong. And we will see that the two splits in Islam, the Sunni Shiite split, it makes for weakness and succession of rulers. It becomes difficult. Should we have Sunni ruler? Should we have Shiite ruler? And so that religious disunity is going to be a problem for sure. And ultimately, it'll be the Seljuk Turks that come through with their mastery of ranged warfare and light fighting styles. The Seljuk Turks are going to also gain some gunpowder from the Silk Road in China, and they're going to use it to unify the world under a sultan. But again, more discussion later. That's a topic for another day. We're almost done. Now, a part of the Dark Ages, I'd be remiss if I did not talk about Viking culture. So there they are. The warrior culture known as the Vikings. You gotta know a couple things. First, Scandinavian countries. What are they? They're Finland, Norway, and Sweden. Those are your Scandinavian countries. This is like swath of land that we'd call Scandinavia, but today would be countries Finland, Norway, and Sweden. So that's geography for you. And they're a warrior culture, but they're also brilliant sailors as well. So you've got sort of both, that they are pushing the boundaries of how far and how well we can sail as a people, But yes, they pillage and destroy and kill. They do that as well, right? So trying to give this balanced approach to history as best we can. They're going to use the longship to sail and sail well. They are going to discover Greenland. They are going to eventually arrive in the Americas. We got that famous sailor Leif Erikson, and I know you've heard this before, that Christopher Columbus wasn't the first to arrive. Leif Erikson gets there beforehand. So, not to say that Christopher Columbus isn't important, he obviously is, but just to say that the Vikings had been really testing the boundaries of what people could do. Their culture is an interesting one. So, men and women fight, if you're a Viking. And they have these shield brothers and shield sisters. They fight alongside one another, and I always show this really awesome clip from the hit series Vikings, and it really shows that this strategy is very much like the phalanx of ancient Greece. The idea that you all work together as a quote-unquote human tank to take out your enemies. You fight together, you fight well, and you use your shield. So there's your shield wall, right? Very effective strategy. Their culture, polytheistic. What does polytheistic mean? Hopefully you know this by now. Many gods. So they have many gods. People like Odin, probably their most important god. He is going to give his eye up for clairvoyance, the ability to see the future. And all gods are supposed to live in Asgard. Of course, there are two camps of gods, and I don't really get into this too much. But Norse mythology, very, very interesting. Pick up a book, read about it. It's humorous, but also violent. It is compassionate, but also vengeful. So there's Odin. Their culture can be brutal. Fallen soldiers were supposed to go to this place called Valhalla, sort of like a heaven. Only thing is that you had to die with honor. You weren't just like going to get there, right? So giving yourself an honorable death on the battlefield was the best way to go to Valhalla. And they had these awful death rituals where if you were a chieftain, your slaves were killed. It was said to be like an honor for a slave to die with their master, and they would burn these people on their long ship. Horrible, horrible stuff. There's Valhalla waiting, right? This is supposed to be this wonderful heaven-like place, but of course, you got to die with honor, right, to reach Valhalla. Now, Vikings, they're cultural diffusionists. Remind me of like a Alexander the Great kind of story here. The Vikings will sail across Europe, and where they go, they spread culture. They meet with the Muslim traders, the Umayyads, and what they do is they trade for Arab gold. And this sort of back and forth between is this real example of cultural diffusion and the spreading across of different ideas. So much cultural diffusion that many of them will even convert to Christianity. Some of them will convert to the Eastern Orthodox religion in Russia and become the ruling class, eventually called czars. And so you see this real cross-cultural pollination being met by the Vikings. Now, what's their legacy? Why should we care about these people? Ultimately, the Vikings are going to settle Normandy. Normandy is northern France. And the Vikings of northern France would eventually be led by a guy named William the Conqueror. And he's got this Domesday Book and all this kind of stuff. And there's so much to talk about William the Conqueror. But just to know that those people are the ones that are going to eventually go up and be able to conquer England, conquer Britain. And so there's this rich history there of the Vikings, not only as cultural diffusionists, but also as conquerors. And so, like the Dark Ages, the Vikings represent this sort of good and bad that's developing. The last thing I got for you, and something just to sort of check out, is I do a rap for my students to Drake's Too Much. It's a really, really good song. However, I take Justinian and Theodora and their story, which reminds me so much of the classic Romeo and Juliet story by Shakespeare and the two families. There's a lot of comparisons there. And I try my best to sort of get into the mind of Justinian as I do this rap. So It's on YouTube. You should really check it out. There's the sort of tag below. Just type in Mr. Casey, all caps, no spaces, Dark Ages rap, and hopefully you'll see something really, really cool. Anyway, thank you for listening. That's the Dark Ages wrapped up. Have a great day.